It was a humid summer evening in Redford, a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, or thought they did. The streets were quiet except for the hum of cicadas and the faint glow of the diner sign flickering across the road from the police station. Inside that station, fluorescent lights buzzed above chipped linoleum floors and coffee-stained desks. It was the kind of place that ran on habit more than order. At the booking counter sat Officer Greg Hanlon, a man who'd been with the department long enough to believe his badge made him untouchable. His partner, Officer Riley, younger but cut from the same cloth, leaned against the wall scrolling his phone between laughs. The sound of boots echoed from the hallway as another officer led in a woman in handcuffs. Her name was Danielle Porter. She was 26, a local paralegal who worked part-time at the courthouse just across the street. That night, she'd been driving home from the library when she was pulled over for a broken taillight. What began as a routine stop had turned into an arrest after a disagreement over her identification. The details were messy, the justification thinner than paper, but none of that mattered once the cuffs clicked. They brought her in quietly. But what followed was anything but. "Sit her down," Hanlon said, motioning to the bench. "Let's see what kind of trouble we've got." Danielle stayed silent, her wrist still bound, her eyes steady. She wasn't the kind to yell or plead. She'd seen too many clients do that from the other side of the legal system. "Name." "You have my ID," she said calmly. Riley smirked. "Oh, we've got a feisty one." Hanlon flipped through her purse. "Paralegal, huh? Guess you know the system." Danielle said nothing. "Must be fun helping all those lawyers out," he continued. "Maybe one of them can bail you out after we're done." He motioned toward another officer. "We're going to take her to holding." Standard process. But the process that followed was anything but standard. They searched her bag, emptied her pockets, then told her they needed to remove her hair clip for safety. Danielle complied. When they found a small vial of hair oil, something she used daily, Riley grinned. "What's this?" "Contraband. It's conditioner," she said quietly. He held it up like evidence. "Sure it is." The laughter came easily then, the kind that wasn't loud but cruel. Hanlon leaned back in his chair. "You know what? Let's get booking photos, hair out. We'll need her to remove those extensions." "They're not extensions," she said. "It's my hair." Riley raised an eyebrow. "Then take it down." When she didn't move, Hanlon nodded to another officer. "Help her out." The scuffle that followed was brief but humiliating. Her hair was pulled, her pride stripped alongside it. She sat still, jaw tight, as Riley held up the clippers. "Standard decontamination for holding," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. The buzzing sound filled the room. Hanlon laughed quietly. "You'll thank us later. Easier maintenance." By the time they were done, a pile of thick black curls covered the floor. Danielle stared straight ahead, her face expressionless, her dignity hanging by a thread. "Take the picture," Hanlon said. The flash went off. The mugshot captured everything. Not her guilt, not her defiance, but something harder to define, the quiet weight of injustice. That night, she was held for 8 hours before being released without charges. They cited miscommunication and clerical error. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. When she walked out of that building, the sun was rising. Her head felt light, the air sharp against her bare scalp. She didn't cry, not then, not in front of them, but as she walked home, her reflection in every window reminded her of what they'd taken. Over the following months, she tried to move on. She filed a complaint when it went nowhere. She contacted an attorney, but the case was buried under procedural excuses. Not enough evidence, they said. Hard to prove intent, she didn't push back. Not out of fear, but because she understood the system. She knew how it worked, how it protected itself first. So she did what no one expected. She left. She left her job at the courthouse, enrolled in law school 2 towns over, and began the long, exhausting climb through the system that had failed her. Years passed. She studied relentlessly, graduated near the top of her class, and went on to become a defense attorney known for her composure and precision. She didn't raise her voice in court. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than anger ever could. When she took the bench for the first time as a county judge, the courtroom fell into a hush. At 37, she was one of the youngest judges in the state. Her black robe felt heavy on her shoulders, Not because of pride, but because of memory. The gavel in her hand wasn't a symbol of authority. It was one of accountability. She had promised herself that she'd never let humiliation define her story. Justice, she'd learned, wasn't about revenge. It was about discipline, the kind that holds you steady when you could easily let rage lead the way. That promise would soon be tested. 10 years after that night, a new case file landed on her desk. The names on the paperwork caught her attention immediately. State versus Hanlon, Gregg. Riley, Thomas. Her pulse didn't quicken. She didn't gasp. She simply read the file carefully, every word like a slow exhale. Charges: excessive force, misconduct, and abuse of authority. The date of the alleged incident was recent. Different victim, same behavior. For a long moment, Danielle sat still in her chambers, the faint hum of the courthouse air conditioner the only sound. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the past and present fold quietly together. She had prepared her entire life for justice. Now it was standing in front of her, not as vengeance but as balance. When the trial date was set, the local press buzzed about it. Few people realized who she was to the defendants. To them, she was just Judge Porter, known for her calm demeanor and sharp mind. But when Hanlon and Riley entered the courtroom on the first day of the trial, escorted by their attorneys, their confidence faltered. Hanlon, now grayer and heavier, looked up at the bench. His face went pale. Riley froze mid-step. There she was, the woman they had once laughed at, standing above them in her robe, gavel in hand. For a moment, neither of them moved. The memory was written across their faces. The booking room, the laughter, the sound of clippers. Judge Danielle Porter glanced up from the file, her expression neutral. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her tone even, professional. "Let's begin." The courtroom was silent. No one there knew the story, not the bailiff, not the jury, not the attorneys. But in that moment, the power dynamic that had once been so brutally tilted reversed itself completely, and for the first time in her life, Danielle didn't have to say a word to be heard. The courtroom was full by the second day of trial. Reporters had filled the back rows, pens poised, waiting to capture every word of what was quickly becoming one of the most talked-about cases in Redford County history. 2 veteran officers accused of abuse and misconduct. 2 men who had built reputations on discipline and control, now sitting at the defense table, stripped of their authority. But for Judge Danielle Porter, the noise of it all barely reached her. From the bench, she could see everything: the uneasy shuffle of the defendants, the anxious glances between their lawyers, the faint murmurs from the gallery. But her expression never changed. She sat tall, calm, deliberate, a presence that didn't need volume to command respect. "Court is now in session," she said softly. Her voice was clear and measured, the kind that seemed to slow the air around it. The first witness was called, a young man named Luis Hernandez, a construction worker who'd been pulled over by officers Hanlon and Riley 6 months earlier. His story was painfully familiar. "They said my tail light was out," Luis said, his voice trembling slightly. "But when I tried to explain that I'd just replaced it, they got angry. Said I was mouthing off. Next thing I know, I'm face down on the ground, handcuffed." His lawyer asked, "Did you resist arrest?" "No, ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't even raise my voice." As he spoke, Danielle's hands remained folded neatly on the bench. But inside, she felt that familiar tightness in her chest. Not anger this time, but recognition. His fear, his disbelief, his quiet dignity. She knew it all too well. When the defense cross-examined, Officer Riley avoided her gaze. He sat rigid, his jaw tight, while his attorney spoke on his behalf. Hanlon scribbled notes that didn't seem to mean anything, his pen moving just to keep his hands busy. "Mr. Hernandez," the defense attorney said, "would you agree that the officers believed you were reaching for a weapon?" "I was reaching for my registration," Luis replied. "It was in the glove box. I told them that. But you can understand how an officer might see that as a threat." Luis hesitated, then said quietly, "If they wanted to see a threat, they were going to, no matter what I did." That sentence hung in the air. A few jurors exchanged glances. Danielle leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but firm. "Let's keep the questioning factual, counselor." The defense attorney nodded quickly, realizing the line of argument had backfired. As the testimony continued, Danielle kept her composure. No one in the room noticed the small signs, the way her fingers tapped once against the wood when a memory hit too close, or the faint breath she took before each objection ruling. She was steady, restrained, but every word spoken in that courtroom carried echoes of a night long past. During the afternoon recess, Danielle retreated to her chambers. The room was quiet, lined with legal books and framed photos from her early years in law school. She removed her robe and hung it neatly on the hook, then sat down, staring at the case file on her desk. The past had a way of visiting uninvited. She could still hear the electric buzz of those clippers, the laughter, the feel of the air against her skin afterward. 10 years and it still hadn't left, but she had made herself a promise all those years ago. She would never let bitterness dictate justice. A soft knock came at the door. Her clerk, Eva, stepped in. "Judge, you okay?" Danielle smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just thinking," Eva hesitated. "The press is asking for a statement about the case." "No statement," Danielle said. "This isn't about spectacle." "Yes, Mom." Eva paused, then added quietly, "You're handling it beautifully." When court resumed, the defense began calling their witnesses. Officer Hanlon was first. He looked older than his years, hair thinning, eyes weary, the once cocky confidence replaced by something brittle. He adjusted his tie nervously as he took the stand. His attorney started softly. "Officer Hanlon, you've served on the force for how long?" 22 years, he said. "And have you ever been accused of misconduct before this?" He shook his head. "No, sir, never. Can you describe what happened during your encounter with Mr. Hernandez?" Hanlon hesitated. "It happened fast. We thought he was reaching for something. Did you find anything?" "No. So in hindsight, do you believe you may have acted prematurely?" He swallowed. "Yes, but it wasn't intentional. We were following procedure. Procedure doesn't include force unless justified, correct?" "Yes, sir." Danielle watched him carefully. His words were practiced, his tone cautious, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of shame that hadn't been there 10 years ago. The prosecution rose for cross-examination. "Officer Hanlon, how many times have you used force in the last 5 years?" 3. "And how many of those incidents involved black or Latino men?" He hesitated. "All 3. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor's voice stayed level. "Would you say that's coincidence?" Hanlon's throat tightened. "No, I don't know. Do you recall an incident approximately 10 years ago involving a woman named Danielle Porter?" For the first time, the room fell utterly still. Hanlon's gaze flickered toward the bench. His face went pale. "Yes," he said quietly. "And what happened that night?" He swallowed hard. We brought her in for questioning. It was a misunderstanding." "Was force used?" He looked down. "Yes. Was it necessary?" Silence. "Officer Hanlon," the prosecutor pressed, "was it necessary?" "No," he said finally, his voice barely audible. Danielle didn't move. She kept her expression neutral, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. When court adjourned that evening, the press outside swarmed the courthouse steps, but Danielle slipped quietly out the back exit. She drove home with the windows down, the sound of crickets replacing the buzz of city chatter. At home, she poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The night air was heavy but peaceful. She thought of how life had a strange way of circling back, not as punishment, but as a test of who you'd become since the first wound. She hadn't spoken a word to Hanlon or Riley, beyond the necessary formalities. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. The trial would continue for several more days, but its outcome was already unfolding quietly in that courtroom. Not just in the evidence, but in the looks exchanged. The truths that had been buried and were now crawling into the light. Justice wasn't loud, Danielle realized. It was patient, and sometimes the silence that follows truth is the loudest sound in the world. By the third week of the trial, the courtroom felt heavier, not with noise but with the quiet weight of reckoning. The case had drawn attention far beyond Redford. Every major news outlet had a reporter sitting in the back row, pens ready, waiting to turn each testimony into a headline. But for Judge Danielle Porter, the cameras, the whispers, and the curiosity outside the courthouse were nothing compared to the truth slowly unfolding inside it. On Monday morning, the prosecution called its final witness, Officer Thomas Riley. Danielle recognized the tremor in his hands before he even took the oath. His once easy smirk was gone. He looked older, humbled and deeply uncomfortable. When he sat down, his eyes flickered briefly toward her, not in defiance, not even in fear, but something closer to regret. The prosecutor began carefully. "Officer Riley, you were present for the incident involving Mr. Hernandez, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "You and Officer Hanlon initiated the stop?" "Yes." "And you were also partners during an earlier incident approximately 10 years ago?" He hesitated. "Yes. Would you describe your behavior during that earlier incident as professional?" Riley's jaw tightened. His lawyer whispered something, but he shook his head slightly. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't." The room seemed to hold its breath. The prosecutor nodded, her tone calm but firm. "Tell the court what happened." Riley looked down at his folded hands. "We brought in a woman that night, a black woman. She hadn't done anything wrong. We stopped her over a taillight, but it wasn't about that. We made it personal." The audience stirred, the shuffle of seats and pens filling the air. "Go on," the prosecutor said gently. She tried to explain. Riley continued, voice low. She was calm. "But Hanlon made comments and I laughed. We cut her hair, said it was procedure, but it wasn't. It was humiliation. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did." His voice broke slightly. "I remember her face when we were done. She didn't say a word, just looked at us. I've never forgotten that." For the first time, Riley looked up toward the bench. His eyes met Danielle's. The silence between them was thick, almost unbearable. "I didn't know back then," he said softly, his words trembling in the still air. "Didn't understand what it means to strip someone of dignity. I do now. And I'm sorry." The courtroom stayed silent. Danielle didn't react. Her face remained composed, every muscle controlled. But deep down something shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but acknowledgement. The prosecutor cleared her throat. "No further questions, Your Honor." When the defense attorney rose to cross-examine, he hesitated, then simply said, "No questions." "Your Honor." It was the first time in the entire trial that a defense attorney had refused to speak. That evening, after court adjourned, Danielle lingered in her chambers longer than usual. The file from the day's proceedings lay open on her desk, but she wasn't reading it. Her thoughts were somewhere else, back in that cold, sterile room 10 years earlier. The sound of laughter, the vibration of the clippers, the way she'd stared at the wall and promised herself she wouldn't let them see her break. She had kept that promise. But now, sitting alone under the soft glow of her desk lamp, she realized something else. Power didn't erase pain. It just reframed it. A soft knock broke the quiet. Her clerk, Eva, stepped inside with a hesitant smile. "Judge, you've got someone waiting to see you." "Says it's personal." Danielle frowned. "Who?" "Officer Riley," Eva said. "He asked if he could speak with you privately." For a long moment, Danielle said nothing. Then she nodded. "Send him in." Eva left, and a moment later, Riley stepped through the doorway, hat in hand. Out of uniform now, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. "Judge Porter," he began, his voice uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Riley," she said evenly. "This is highly irregular." "I know," he said quickly. "And if it's out of line, I'll leave right now. I just needed to say something to you, not in court, not on record, just as a man." Danielle leaned back slightly, watching him. "Go ahead." He swallowed hard. "That night I thought we were in control. I thought that uniform made us right. I've had 10 years to think about what we did, about what I laughed at. I've replayed it more times than I can count, and every time I remember your face, you didn't yell, didn't fight. You just looked at us. That look stuck with me. It made me hate myself." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "I know you don't owe me forgiveness. I don't even expect it. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not because of this trial. Because I should have been better back then." For a long moment, the room was silent. Danielle studied him carefully. "You have a family, Officer Riley." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "2 kids. Then teach them better than you were taught," she said quietly. "That's how you make it right." Riley's eyes glistened. He nodded once, then turned and left the room. When the door closed, Danielle exhaled slowly, resting her hands on the desk. Her heart felt heavy, but there was a strange sense of clarity too, like something long frozen inside her had finally begun to thaw. The next morning, the courtroom was full again for closing arguments. The prosecution delivered a concise, forceful case built on facts and patterns, the history of misconduct, the testimony of victims, the undeniable threat of abuse of authority. The defense spoke of pressure, fear, mistakes made in the line of duty. But their arguments landed flat. The jurors had seen too much, heard too much, to hide behind excuses. When it was time for instructions, Danielle spoke to the jury in her usual calm tone, her voice steady and deliberate. "Justice is not about anger," she said. "It's about accountability. The badge is not a shield against truth. It's a promise, one that must be kept even when it's difficult. You are not here to condemn anyone, but to determine whether those promises were broken." The jury deliberated for hours. When they finally returned, the room fell silent again as the foreperson stood. On the charges of excessive force and abuse of authority, she read, "We find both defendants guilty." A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Hanlon's shoulders slumped. Riley closed his eyes. Danielle's gavel struck once, sharp and clear. "Verdict entered into record," she said. "Sentencing will be scheduled for next week." As the bailiffs led the two men out, Hanlon turned briefly toward her. Their eyes met for the first time since that night a decade earlier. There was no defiance there anymore, only understanding. Danielle sat quietly on the bench, her hands folded, watching as they disappeared through the side door. When the courtroom emptied, she stayed behind for a while. The sound of her own footsteps echoed softly in the space that had held so much history, so much pain, so much truth. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a quiet smile. It wasn't triumph. It was peace.